2, take 1.
You got to get past that female tendency to look at the job and say, you can't do it. And I'm just going to say that I can do it and I'll get in the job and then I'll just like prove to them that I can do it.
Fake it till you make it.
I'm the first Black leader, period, at the organization. And I feel like I have so much weight on me to be perfect. Not being perfect is an okay thing. You are enough as you are. We bring our whole selves to work, whether we choose to or not.
I remember a time when you really couldn't bring your whole self to work.
I think more and more total rewards are starting to think about taking care of the whole person. We're looking at well-being and we're making sure that everybody has the same outcome.
How do you balance fairness?
I don't like the term fair, because I think oftentimes when people think of fair, they think of equal. It is less about fairness and it's more about leveling the playing field so that everybody gets the same shot. That's equity.
Younger people, a lot of them are questioning college degrees and academic credentials.
College degree is just the knowledge, but oftentimes it's the work experience that truly matters. Higher ed tends to be a little bit behind what's actually happening in the business world. So companies are not going to always be able to find the talent in higher ed. They're going to have to build the talent in-house. And with the uprising of AI and how much it is disrupting business, jobs are going to look so very different.
What does that mean for evaluating performance in the organization?
AI is just like another team member. I think there will be performance evaluations.
Hi, and welcome to Leaders in Learning. I'm your host, Brandon Carson. Today, I'm joined by Jocelyne Wright-McLemore, one of the most refreshingly honest voices in HR. With over a decade of expertise in compensation and benefits and 2 decades in human resources, Jocelyne has built her career across industries, roles, and obstacles without a traditional roadmap. Jocelyne brings bold ideas, hard-won insights, in a no-fluff take on what the future of work should look like. If you've ever wondered what it really takes to lead with empathy and impact, this one's for you.
Jocelyne, it's so good to be here with you. Thank you for joining us on Leaders in Learning.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
So I want to dig right in. You did a presentation titled Fake It Till You Make It. Can you build on that, like the premise behind it and what it meant?
Yeah, so that particular talk was for women who are looking to get into, more senior levels of leadership. And that was taken from my own learnings. And so particularly the last job that I was in at the time I did the presentation, I was taking a more director level role. And I remember as I was going through the interview process thinking, I don't know that I can actually do this job, but I'm going to, and this is... I'm going to say this, but I was like, I'm going to act like a white man and I'm just going to say that I can do it and I'll get in the job and then I'll just like prove to them that I can do it, right? So I had this whole mentality going through this interview process. Every step of the process, like just channel that you can do it whether or not you can do it. And I remember getting into the role and then thinking, holy crap, now I actually have to do this thing. And I faked it for a while, right? Like I faked it. There was things that I knew how to do or I could fake my way around. And then it got to a certain point to where it's like, okay, you faked as far as you can. And now you've got to have a set of skill sets that you don't actually have yet, right? And that was a moment where I had to sort of raise my hand and say, I have a deficit in this area and I want to grow. And so what can you do as a leadership team to help me get to where I need to be in order to execute well?
That's really interesting. When you reflect back on that moment where you realize, wait, I now have to be maybe even more authentic about this situation, what did it take within you to be able to raise your hand and say, okay, wait, I need to talk about this. I need more questions. I need more answers.
It was actually working with an exec coach. So the company at the time, they would cover an exec coach for anyone who was director level or above. And I remember that first conversation with my exec coach, which I ended up spending, at the end of that session, I cried for like 10 minutes. That's never what you expect going into an executive coaching session. But I went in and, we started talking about why I wanted to have an exec coach. And I said, I'm the first Black leader, period, at the organization. I'm the most senior Black person, and I feel like I have so much weight on me to be perfect. And in that perfection that I feel like I have to have, I'm not growing because I don't feel like I can raise my hand and say, I need help, right? And so we started to dig into, why do you feel that you've got all this weight and all this pressure on you? Because I'm pretty sure no one else is looking at you that way, right? And we started to dig into my background, my history. You know, my dad was a Marine. I was a firstborn kid. There's like so many things that sort of went into how I was raised that I carried into the job. And in that moment, she sort of worked with me through why I had a hesitation about asking for help. And once we got past that hurdle, it was in that moment where I felt, okay, it's okay for me to say this. It doesn't mean that I'm not smart. It doesn't mean that I'm not capable. It just means that I'm not perfect. And not being perfect is an okay thing.
When you think back on that type of situation and thinking about what you would say to other people in similar situations, because we talked a little bit about imposter syndrome and how this correlates.
Right.
And I actually had an experience once with some of that imposter syndrome, being put into a role that was new to me and unusual for me, and trying to navigate it. What would be your advice for people who find themselves in these situations where they maybe don't feel vulnerable enough, or maybe the culture doesn't have affordance for that, for them to raise their hand and say, like, here I am, I need some help, and let's talk about this?
Yeah. So I think one is like having somebody who's outside. So whether it's outside the company or outside the situation, that you trust, that you can have like an open dialogue and conversation about. So that's one. I also think like mentorship is really important, and finding someone who's been there, who's done that, who's gone through that experience, and can sort of guide you through what to do next. In that particular situation, and in many situations throughout my career where I've been the one to be like, oh, I don't know that, but I am gonna like go for that and figure it out. Like that's just been the story of my career. And oftentimes I will seek out those people who have done it, who know it, and I have like a level of safety with, that I can go and say, hey, can I ask you a question about this? Or I'm in this situation, I need advice. So it really is finding the people that you can trust. It doesn't mean that they'll always be in the organization. Sometimes they'll be outside of the organization, but you do need that circle that you can go to support you.
Yeah, almost a circle of trust in some regard.
Yeah.
You mentioned executive coaching. Was that the first time you had an executive coach to help you? I've often thought that coaching is a critical unlock for leaders. What's your thought on coaching and how it, and even you mentioned mentoring, right? How that plays into the journey, the career journey?
Yeah, for me, I don't think that I would be where I am today if I didn't have an exec coach. And this is just my experience with exec coaches. I don't know if this is like every experience that every person has with an exec coach. I think first of all, you have to find the right person who you can build that rapport with to have those level of deep conversations. But we bring our whole selves to work, whether we choose to or not. You are bringing your baggage, your history, your work experiences. You're bringing all of that into the door when you come into work. And so your outside life does affect who you are and how you show up. And so the value of having a coach is being able to dig into you as an individual, and what are the things that drive you? What are the things that are accelerators for you? What are the things that are detractors from you? And how do you then become a better person? And being a better person then makes you a better leader, a better employee, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. I remember not too long ago, I mean, this was pre-pandemic, but I remember a time when you really couldn't bring your whole self to work. Like there was a different you sometimes at work.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but to me, it seems like the pandemic kind of transformed us away from that. I remember one Zoom meeting with some senior leaders we were on during the pandemic, and it was like everyone's animals were making noise in the background and birds chirping, and we literally had the CEO on this call, and he's like, am I at a company or a zoo? What's going on here? So what is it? I mean, that has been a shift in some regard. to be able to bring your whole self to work. But when you feel like that's okay to do that, what are the dynamics in the workplace that from your perspective enable the ability for someone to bring their whole self?
People talk a lot about psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so critical to being able to show up as your whole self, to know that there is no judgment, to know that that failure is okay, to know that if you're not having your best day or you're not having your most high energy day, that showing up is enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the idea of psychological safety is that you are enough as you are. You don't
Mm-hmm.
always have to be the best version of yourself, but you are enough as you are. And so I think for people, when there is safety, they are willing to raise their hand. They do get better. They do take more risks.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, risk taking means that you lead to innovation, you lead to better results. But if people are afraid to fail, to make mistakes, to speak up, then you're just holding back, and that's not great for your business.
It's interesting because I've had a few people lately, because I mentioned psychological safety in something I was putting together, and I had some people review it, some colleagues review it. A couple of them came back and like, I don't even believe in that. I don't know what that is. And I'm like, well, no, I totally understand what this is, because I've been in these situations where if you're in certain meetings, maybe you didn't feel like you could speak up, or that you could actually contradict or have a different perspective.
Yeah.
What do you think is necessary in the culture to have that type of environment where people do feel like they can take risk, or if I fail, I can recover?
Yeah. I think, first of all, it takes leaders showing up authentically. So when you see someone who's above you, who has more authority, more power than you, and you see them admitting to failure, you see them maybe not showing up as their best, that gives like a sigh of like, okay, if this person is okay with this, then maybe it's okay for me to do the same thing. So I think that's one, just like leaders showing up authentically and showing vulnerability. But it starts with the little things, like when someone makes a mistake and having an honest conversation and talking about it, and you're building a level of trust. Part of it is showing up, and part of it is just taking that time to build that relationship and show who you are as a leader. And then that creates like that environment. Now, as a culture, a company culture, that is much harder to do.
Yeah.
Because now you're getting all of these managers, all of these employees to think that way, right? And now you're getting lots of personalities that you're trying to meld together into that.
Yeah, I had a leader once tell me that the big unlock is to try to enable our leaders to be developers of talent, and to be intentional with how they focus on talent from that perspective, not just the work to get done, not just the jobs to be done.
Yeah.
When you look at leaders from your past that you reflect back on, what are those components in that they exhibited that helped you move the needle for yourself a little bit, when you think about, okay, these are areas I aspire to or want to be focused on? What were those types of leaders that you remember when you think back on that?
It's funny enough, like almost every single one of my leaders in HR have been that for me, except for maybe one. And most of them were actually female, which there's a reason why I say that. It's because I think in this, I'll say this and you can decide if you want to edit it out. This may sound a little bit sexist, but it is nature that women tend to be more nurturing. And I think oftentimes when you're trying to develop psychological safety, there is an element of care for the other person and wanting them to thrive, right? And making the best environment for them as possible. And so a lot of those leaders would dig into who I am as an individual, understand my insecurities, understand the things that were holding me back. And then they became bridge makers, right? To establish those bridges, or they would open the doors, open the window, however it was, to get me into that next situation or next spot. So they became real advocates for me. But in spite of that, I also say I've also had at least one leader who was male, and he was very much that same role. So I don't say it's like a woman or a man thing, but I do think it is about caring about the people who are on your team and wanting to nurture them and see them be the best versions of themselves.
I love that. We were at a leadership forum where leaders of the company were just taking questions from the employees that were there. And one of our, it's our president of the US business, she was asked, when you think about your journey, how did you, to her, how did you get to where you are? Because she didn't have a college education. She had a background that, it wasn't expected of her to rise to the position she got to.
Yeah.
She said that there were 3 people in her journey that saw her. She said that it was those 3. It takes someone to take a moment and see you and recognize your value as an individual. And it's interesting to see that you can have, if she didn't have a college education, she didn't have all these things, right, that we think is necessary to get to high positions or whatever. And when I was talking to a cohort more recently of some of the frontline employees that we had at a company I was at, a lot of them are questioning college degrees and academic credentials and these kinds of things in their career navigation.
Yeah.
What is your thinking about what's really necessary for people, to move to get their to meet their aspirations?
I'm very similar to this woman that you talked about. So I do not have a college degree. Well, in 30 days, that will change. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes,
I've been working on my bachelor's degree for 7 years now. We are at the end of that journey. So I will be joining the ranks of the college educated. Similar to her, I didn't have a college degree. And so there's definitely a level of determination that is required, a level of curiosity that is also required. I think, when I would go for these roles, and there was my first sort of like true HR business partner role, and I remember I looked at the job description, and I said, well, I can't do that, and that. I'm going to apply for the job. And I remember I was getting ready for the interview, and I just Googled those 5 topics that I didn't know. I Googled them so I could talk enough about them in the interview. So when you talk about fake it till you make it, I knew enough to talk about it in the interview. And when I got the job, I think I had about a month before I started that role. I spent every day researching and writing stuff down and educating myself. And so there was a determination, I'm going to do this. There was the curiosity to like dig into things and find out. And it's just tenacity. Sometimes it really is truly tenacity. And so it's like, having a college degree for a long time was sort of like, check the box, everything. And in reality, we all know the college degree is just the knowledge, but oftentimes it's the work experience that actually truly matters, right? Once you start to apply that is when it really, really matters. And so being able to have sort of those soft skill sets are, I would say, almost as important or even more important than the college degree itself.
I would add to that in some respect, the degree is a barrier in a lot of ways, because the majority of jobs in the US require one. And that cuts a significant portion of the talent pool right away. Just cuts that out right away, and it prohibits access. And I think a lot of people are starting to question, what am I getting out of that, right? And so I remember at one company, we were trying to de-credential the job architecture and find the jobs where we could remove the requirement to have a college degree to broaden access. And it's interesting you mentioned that on the job description, because we found during that process that we did research on how people come to job descriptions. And we found that if women are looking at a job description, if they don't feel like they meet every criteria listed, they won't apply.
Yes.
Versus men who will apply for multiple jobs they're not even qualified for in the company. And women won't do that.
Yeah.
And so we were trying to figure out ways to encourage people to not get so, because some of these job descriptions can be 3 or 4 pages and like lots of things there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you experienced obviously looking at this and going, wait a minute, I may not know everything here, but I can do this job.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will provide more context to that particular situation. So this was 2008.
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten laid off, and if you were around for the Great Recession
I
and
remember.
working, I was a year into job search, right? And so there was also a level of desperation where it's like, I have to get this job. Like, I
Yeah.
really, really need this job. So it was a matter of like, you have to do this. But like talking about the scenario of the other job that I went for, the director level job, that was a moment where I said, you got to get past that female tendency to look at the job and say you can't do it. Like you have to get past that. You will not move forward in your career if you sort of let this hold you back. And I think, when we talk about imposter syndrome, you have these skill sets. You've done them. You haven't done them to this level. This will be your first time leading it and building an entire team, but you have the skill sets. They're there.
We're going to jump over to talk a little bit about rewards,
Mm-hmm.
and not just from a comp perspective, but one of the things that I'm finding when we talk to, especially Gen Z or millennials in the workforce, they're looking for opportunity. I mean, I think everyone seeks opportunity, but in my prior role, we found that Gen Z and millennials are real specific about learning being a part of the total rewards package of an organization.
Yeah.
And at one company that does research year over year, asking customers, employees, and other stakeholders sentiment on the brand, usually year over year, it was a retail organization. Year over year, usually number one is wage related, like pay people, more or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But for the first time, this was in 2023, for the first time ever that this research had been done, what moved to number one was not wages, but train me for the future of work. That became more important to the broader sentiment of the demographics they sought for. And I've been hearing that from a lot of Gen Z and millennials, that we want opportunity, but we want to be, taught and educated in, growth and development.
Yeah.
So when you see that, when you think of total rewards
Mm-hmm.
and packages, it's not just compensation, right? It's also like, what is my growth and development opportunity at this company? Should that be included in these broader strategies when you think about total rewards for an organization?
Yeah, I agree. So I think historically, when you think, 20 years ago or more, total rewards was generally thought about as a salary and your health insurance. And then maybe
right.
you got some stock options or you got a retirement or whatever, right? I think over time, total rewards has evolved to where it's about care for the entire person. Gallup has this really great study, the state of global well-being, and it covers many different aspects of well-being. And so when I was starting to look at designing a total reward strategy for one of my prior companies, I started to do research there because ultimately, sort of going back to a point I made earlier, a person is bringing in their whole self to work, right? Whatever mental state they're in, financial state they're in, community status that they're in, like all of that comes with them. And so if you start ignoring pieces of their well-being, it does eventually impact your business. So you need to pay attention. You have to pay attention. Now, and I think more and more total rewards are starting to think about taking care of the whole person and then seeing the benefits be reaped when there's high engagement and people are excited about work, they're more involved with work. I think it leads to better business results.
And we're starting to see, especially on the education front, we're starting to see benefits extended to family members as well.
Yes.
I think the narrative has shifted a bit with companies because what does the workforce expect from, to your point, on the benefits package, if you will, of companies, right?
Yeah,
And so a lot of companies are now helping people with access to education, education for their family and well-being and these kinds of things. Has the narrative permanently shifted for HR? Like, are we now enablers of broader access to education and, well-being and all of these things in the workplace? What is your perspective on that?
I think so. I think there's still more work to be done. I think there's a ways to go, but I think the conversation is headed in a direction that we will not turn back from. To the point of like millennials and Gen Z, they do ask for more. And I think as we see the world evolve, as we see society evolve, we're going to see that more and more. I think, there used to be a time where you could do the white collar job or the blue collar job, right? And you would make enough to take care of your family, own a house, do all these things. And as society has changed, as the economy has changed, people still want the same things, but the way in which you get them looks very different. So, I think over time, and we've already seen it, we hear people talk a lot about the future of work and the future of skill sets and developing skill sets and being less focused on a job in and of itself. But what are the types of skill sets that we as an organization are going to need in the next 5 to 10 years? And with the just like uprising of AI and how much it is disrupting business, jobs are going to look so very different, right? And so companies they're not going to always be able to find the talent in higher ed. And my husband works in higher ed, so not dissing his job at all. But higher ed tends to be a little bit behind what's actually happening in the business world, right? So if you think about these organizations are going to need talent, they can't get this talent from college educated, graduates. They're going to have to build the talent in-house. And so there's going to have to be an investment. And so there's this concept that's been in HR for a while. It's, are you going to buy? Are you going to build? Are you going to borrow? Right. And I think we're getting into the stage where we're now more focused on either you're going to buy or you're going to build it. And with companies being asked to do more with less, then we get into the build it stage, right? And so I do think that over time, we're going to invest more in building so that we can have the skill sets that we need.
I think you're spot on with that. It's interesting because when you talk to leaders, like let's talk about succession planning, or they're looking across and assessing the talent that they have, a lot of leaders have trouble identifying what are the skills that we need to focus on to build that, to do the upskilling or reskilling.
Yeah.
And when you think about compensation models, should we evolve those to be more skills-based? Like, how do you see this unfolding?
Oh gosh. The conversation about skills-based compensation has gone back and forth so many times. Like I 5 years ago, I was leading a project and then it sort of fell off and now it's coming back into focus. I do think it is here to stay, though. And the reason why is AI.
Because jobs are going to fundamentally change.
They're going to fundamentally change.
Yeah.
Like, let's even talk about my career, for example, right? You have a large language model that can develop a formula in 2 seconds. A highly complex formula.
Right.
Sometimes it will take me like 2 minutes to build out that formula, right? And so this system can build that formula in 2 minutes, turn back an analysis on a spreadsheet in 2 seconds, 20 seconds, what have you. And so even in a role like mine that has been very specialized and it takes a lot of analytical skill, you have a system now that can do the analytics. And so it's going to be less about, can I build a multi-nested formula, and more so, what is the analysis telling me, and how do I then translate that into return on investment for the business? How do I move that forward? And so I think in a lot of cases, even if you think about a software engineer, for example, there will be some time in the future where AI is coding. It's already started, right? And so what then are the skill sets that software engineers need? It's not coding anymore. Right? And so fundamentally, jobs are going to change. We're never going back to where we were.
I was having this dinner the other night with some HR colleagues because for some odd reason I can just never escape talking to HR people.
We are amazing people, okay? We
Yeah.
love to have fun.
The
We're
food
super
was good.
interesting.
The food was But one question came up to the table, and I'd like to throw it out at you and see what your response is. How, when we start infusing agents,
Hmm.
into the workplace, agents who can take action on things and do things for you, augment you, lots of different ways. We're being told they're going to be useful. How do you evaluate the performance of agents and also the performance of humans? Like, what does that mean for
Ooh.
evaluating performance in the organization? Because to your
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
agents can do things like certain things logistically, especially, or even, with like numbers
Yeah.
really quickly.
Yeah.
And they're going to take action and be autonomous in some respect. Is that a new form of performance evaluation that we need in the organization?
I think so. And here's why. We were talking about AI adoption on my current people leadership team. And we were having this like back and forth with like the head of people. And I said, AI is just like another team member, one that you have to manage. And she's like, yeah, but they just have 53 doctorate degrees. And so, it is their AI is incredibly smart, but in the same way that you have to manage your team members, you also have to manage AI, right? So
Yeah.
you've got to stay on
Yes.
top of what it's doing. You got to double check its work. I mean, we all know about the hallucinations and things
Yes.
like that. And so while it is a useful tool, it is still
Yeah.
another team member, if you will, that needs to be managed. And so I think in the same way, there will be performance evaluations to make sure that, yeah, we're still delivering the level of service that we plan, that we're still giving out accurate answers, that it's not putting us in legal risk or fiduciary risk or things like that.
Makes total sense, but it's like, how do you have
It's-
that conversation with the agent, right?
I know it's like in some ways I feel like I'm living out my Jetson, childhood, but it's like it's much larger and more grand than I ever imagined when I was a kid.
That's hilarious. It does bring up a lot of questions around philosophy of AI. Like, what is, as AI starts to be integrated more into the workplace, is it important for companies to come up with I know we're going to have governance and legal requirements and all that, but what
Yeah.
is do you think it's HR's position to have a philosophy for, will AI only augment? Will AI displace or replace people? Or do you think it's important for companies to be transparent about what they want to do with AI across the company?
I'm always going to be the side of transparency. Like I feel like a company should always be transparent. My viewpoint is we're all adults. Employees are not children, they're adults. And so giving people more information allows them to make the decision that is best for them at all times, right? In this case, I think that HR should have a seat at the table and should be a part of that conversation, because you are talking about talent strategy, right? So there is a business of how we have a business strategy, we have a product strategy. How are we going to enable that strategy? And when you start talking about how are we going to actually execute on that strategy, HR needs to have a seat at the table, because now we're talking about the actual people or systems that are going to get the work done.
You've helped design reward systems for distributed teams, equity conscious organizations. How do you see the balance of fairness in these systems? Again, transparency, we talk about that. How do you balance fairness, transparency, and market dynamics and realities when you evaluate and design these models?
I'll first start by saying I don't like the term fair, because I think oftentimes when people think of fair, they think of equal. And when we talk about equity in systems, it is less about fairness and it's more about leveling the playing field so that everybody gets the same shot. Now, what everyone does with that shot is up to them. So when I think about thinking about building a reward system that applies pay equity or things like that, What I'm focusing on is, so I'll take as an example when I was working at one of my prior companies, and they're fully distributed, like they were in 43 countries at the time, but no one worked in the office.
Wow.
And I first came in, and my first week, first like all company hangout, and somebody asked me the question, so are we going to play US salaries in all 43 of our countries? And my first immediate was like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. Why would we do that? But I was like, I'm going to go do my research and I'll come back and see. And the one thing that people don't often consider when they think about compensation is as much a discipline of economics as it is many things, right? And so when you think about the compensation policies that you're putting into place, they do have impact on an economy. So let's say, for example, we hire 100 engineers in Costa Rica and we pay them US salaries. That US salary can afford them 3 mansions, and and so
Quality of life is
drastically different. So when we think about the equity of a system, I'm really looking at the quality of that experience of that individual. When I build a system, can I look at that system and say, everybody can live comfortably? They can own a home, they can take vacation, they can send their children to school. Like, they're not wanting, right? Like we are solving, going back to the healthy financially, like we're looking at well-being, and we're making sure that everybody has the same outcome. And so that was what helped get the employee population from this, everybody needs to be paid a US salary, to, okay, here's where we're at and here's why there are differences in the system. Now, with that being said, you are going to have hiccups, because now you start to introduce things like performance reviews, and you start to introduce managers who are writing those performance reviews and who are assessing people. And I think the one thing that we try to anchor on, or at least I try to anchor on, is making sure that for as many steps that lead to an compensation outcome, that they are as objective as possible, and that we are trying to remove as much bias as possible. We are trying to implement frameworks that leave enough room for decision making, but not so much room that we start to introduce decisions that are not aligned to where we want to be as an organization, or the pay equity model that we're trying to put forward. And then lastly, you talked about transparency. I think transparency is really important, because it then breeds accountability. So if I say every promotion gets treated this way, an employee should know, for every single employee that goes through this process, they get the exact same treatment every single time, the exact same considerations. That's equity.
There's an imbalance in gender and how you're paid. Why are we still in this place where this is a thing?
Yeah. So when we talk about gender, the gender pay gap, we often focus on the outcome. So we focus on the fact that there is an 80 cents to the dollar, right, for female pay versus male pay. And actually, what we should be more focused on is, and I think this is where the conversation has been going for many years, getting more women into leadership, getting more women into STEM jobs. So this is going to get slightly technical. When they talk about gender pay gap, they're just taking all of the pay of the men, averaging it out, all the pay of the women, and averaging it out, right? And so if you think historically, men have been in higher paying jobs, the STEM jobs, the leadership jobs, the what have you, of course the pay is higher. And so how you start to solve for that is seeing more women get into these higher paying jobs, right? But I think there's also a conversation on the other side, is that it's okay for men to be in what has been historically female dominated jobs, right? So you think about nursing or HR, even, for example, we tend to put people in boxes, right? And so I think if we can solve the stream of talent and where it's going, that starts to shift that gender pay gap. But in and of itself, just looking at pay is not enough. It's really about people and where they are.
What do you think is a catalyst for moving this forward? You mentioned the conversation we've been having. Like, is there a catalyst for driving this conversation quicker, or is it just evolution that we need to?
Well, in current times, right now, I don't know that conversation is moving forward as much as we want it to or should. And I don't know. I don't know what the catalyst is, because this has been a conversation that we've been having for
quite a while.
decades.
Yeah.
I think it is going to be up to the private business companies too. So it's going to be part of that, but it's also going to be a little bit of legal requirements. So, Europe has been on a tear right now with the the pay gap and, wage discrimination laws that they've been putting out to try and correct this. So I think it comes from both sides. It is governments mandating that this happens, right? But then it is also private organizations looking at their policies, identifying where there are gaps, and then implementing programs, reducing barriers and things like that to fill it.
But I've encountered people who are struggling to be recognized in their role. And they feel like they have several of them have told me they feel like they have the skills and experience to do more in the role. In your experience, what advice do you have for individuals who are feeling like they're not being recognized, or they want to align their skills and the opportunities in the company to the potential they have?
Yeah.
Do you have advice in this space? Like, what do you think about when you hear that?
Yeah. I think it depends on the organization that you're in, but I think you have to be vocal. Sometimes you have to go towards the opportunity instead of waiting for the opportunity to come to you. In my past, I was in that situation often. And so if there was a project that remotely had the skill set that I was looking for, I would raise my hand. Didn't matter if it was part of my job description or not. I wanted that skill set, that would give me that skill set, I would raise my hand for it. So I think one, it is taking a little bit of initiative, right, in order to build that skill set and having that conversation with your manager. So your manager really is the one, we talk about, developer of talent. Your manager should be a developer of talent. And if not, you need to go find a mentor. You need to go find someone in the organization who can help you, right? Reduce those barriers, get you onto those projects. And then lastly, if you're not finding it there, find a job that will do that for you.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we're afraid to leave.
I had a CEO who spoke at a town hall years ago, it's a long time ago, and he mentioned choose your manager carefully because they are the conduit to your future.
Yes.
At the company. Do you ever think about how you divide your day and how you put focus to people on your team or the work or yourself?
Yeah. So it's funny because I was just I had a one-on-one with a direct report earlier today, and we were talking about something very similar to this. And I was talking to her about how I set up my week. And I try to devote at least an hour per person, like live time per week, if they want it. They're always available. And then additional time if they need it. So I consider myself a talent developer first. And then second, like for me, that is like probably one of the biggest mandates of my job. Then I have my own projects, and I try to keep my projects to a minimum so that I can focus and make sure my team is accelerating the work. Now, the part that I'm still trying to figure out is the me part. So how do I then carve out time? I carve out time for the business. I carve out time for my team. Still figuring out how do I carve out time for myself. But one practice that I have that I started recently is I have like a 15 to 20 minute slot at the end of my day, and I do not let that get booked over. And so I will assess at the end of the day, what did I actually accomplish today? Was it what I meant to accomplish today? What's carrying over into tomorrow? What's carrying over into next week? And then sometimes I will revise my calendar to make sure that I can do that. And so I'm always sort of aligning my calendar to my priorities. And so in some weeks, it will be all about my team because that's what they need. That's like the state of work that we're in. In some weeks, it'll be a quieter week and it's more focused on the business and the strategic work that I need to do.
You've spoken, just to kind of beat on that a bit. You've spoken candidly about feeling like you didn't fit in a specific leadership mold, for example. What helped you embrace that sort of authenticity of Jocelyne, right? And while you were doing that, what got in your way? Because it goes a little bit to what you're talking about being this talent developer, having this intention
Yeah.
in shaping your day.
Yeah. One, it was watching the leaders that I had be those kinds of people, and knowing those were the ones that I wanted to emulate. Those were really great leaders in my life, and I wanted to be that type of leader. Now, granted, I will say I never wanted to be a manager. Even when I took my first managing job, I told my boss, this is a favor, and I'm only doing it for a few months. And now,
here you are.
10 years later, I'm still a leader. And so, but I was like, I want to be the type of leaders that they were. So some of it was emulating them and the qualities that I had seen in them. But even within that, there were things that I wish that they would have done different, right? So it's also like, what type of leader would I want to be? But when we talk about barriers that we face, I think having that coach really helped me work through a lot of those barriers. And so whether it's a therapist or it's a coach, it's someone who you can talk about the things that are incredibly impactful in how you show up as a person, but are very vulnerable to discuss, let's say in a work setting, or to share with the leader. So I think that coaching is probably one of those big things that unlocked it for me.
When you look at early career entrants, people new in the career, in the operating model of work we have, which sometimes is hybrid or completely distributed, is that a barrier for, like, if it's all work and distributed, how do we make sure that opportunity doesn't rely on the work model?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's so much to do with the manager. I know we keep coming back to this,
it's like
the
a heightened
leader,
role for
right? But
managers
it
and leaders.
becomes a much more important and valuable role, right? So if you think about when you're a work setting, relationships develop naturally, rapport develops naturally, people are connecting on a day-to-day basis, and as a leader, when you are distributed or in a hybrid model, you have to be more hyper focused on the work relationships and the dynamics between your team and other teams, because now there's so much more reliance on written and verbal communication than there was in the past.
Yeah.
And so that leader has to play a large part in raising their hand to shepherd someone in and say, I have a great person for this project, or, hey, so-and-so, this is coming. You might want to go talk to this person. So there are times I find myself doing a lot of like, hey, go talk to this person over here, or I've got this person, I think you should talk to them about this work. And so there is a level of the manager needing to play that matchmaker, if you will.
Yeah. It's a new role for a lot of managers, especially in the various work models we have. So especially in this era, I think this question's important. We're undergoing so much transformation. So I just want to zoom out a bit. What's really important for leaders to prioritize as they navigate this era of change and transformation, but also are taking their teams on that journey as well?
Yeah. Probably one of the biggest things that we don't talk about in like change management is resilience. There used to be a time where there would be one change and then, it'd be a year or two before things would change. And now it is constant, right? Like your people are constantly living through a state of change. And one of the best ways to sort of navigate that is to be resilient and to be comfortable being in a state of ambiguity and uncertainty. But what I think we can do as leaders is try to reduce as much of the ambiguity and uncertainty as we can. Now, we can't reduce all of it, right? And so I think there is a level of resilience that our people have to build to that. But there's always this idea of like managers owning the message, right? And so I think when change happens, it's really important for the leader to digest the change first understand it fully, and then be able to then communicate that change to the team and talk about what it means for them specifically, right? Because oftentimes we say, oh, this change is happening, here, go read that. But it's like, then the employee's thinking, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my future? What does this mean for my work? And so being able to like give your people an idea of, okay, here's what's next, here's what you can expect, reduces some of that anxiety that they may have or questions they may have as a result of change.
Yeah, sometimes I think we're in a pandemic of anxiety right now because of all of these things going on. It's not just AI, it's just all of these things conflated together to give the people that work at the company, you know, a nervousness or, you know, where are we at, right? And I think that's where trust and transparency comes in quite a bit. I want to know what's one thing, especially in this era of transformation as well, what's one thing leaders need to stop doing and what's one thing leaders need to start doing?
I would say one thing that they need to stop doing, and which they've needed to stop doing for a while, is saying this is how we've always done it. That becomes a barrier to innovation. And they need to start asking, how can we do this better? How can we do this differently? Be curious. They need to start being a lot more curious.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. This has been amazing. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you.
I love it.